Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the council public meeting for Tuesday, June the 25th. I will read a public meeting statement to begin with. If a person or public body or specified person does not make an oral or submission at a council public meeting or make a written submission to the City of Richmond Hill in respect of a proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, the person, public body, or specified person is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City Council, the Ontario Land Tribunal, and may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So with that, I'd like to call this meeting to order. I need a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Davidson, all those in favor? Opposed, that carries. Thank you. Disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof. I see shaking heads, so that's no, Mr. Clerk. So just keeping in mind for those watching on the video and those in the audience, the purpose, generally speaking, for tonight's meeting is to listen to comments from the public and from stakeholders and from council. We're not really making any final decisions tonight other than we're going to be moving a motion in both cases tonight to refer all the comments back to staff for further review before any final decisions that are going to be made by council. So, but it is an opportunity for those in the audience and those who have signed up at home as delegations to make their comments known. So we have two items of scheduled business tonight. The first one is the draft community improvement plan for affordable housing and sustainable design. And with that, we are going to be having a 20-minute or so presentation by Derek Lau, who's the project manager for climate change and sustainable development. So do we want Derek to kick that off, or is there going to be an opening band? Okay, you're the main headline. Go ahead, Mr. Lau.
All right, thank you very much. And good evening. Again, my name is Derek Lau. And on behalf of the city, we would like to welcome everyone to this council public meeting on the city's draft community improvement plan for affordable housing and sustainable design. We are also joined tonight by other city staff working on this project, as well as our consultant team, including Nick Michael from Enberry Lyons Consultants and Graham Stewart from ERA Architects, who are both part of the consulting team for this project. Next slide, please. And so this is our agenda for tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to get your feedback on the proposed community improvement plan for affordable housing and sustainable design. We'll start first by providing some context to the larger housing picture in Richmond Hill, then explaining what a community improvement plan is. I'll be using the acronym CIP for short throughout this presentation. And then I'll provide an overview of the CIP project, including its purpose and timeline. I'll then pass the presentation over to our consultant team, who will provide a summary of the background report, stakeholder consultation feedback, as well as a summary of the draft CIP itself. And finally, I'll conclude with next steps and recommendations. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the draft CIP, I'd like to take a step back and provide a bigger picture on how this CIP fits with other initiatives related to housing in Richmond Hill. The city has an affordable housing strategy that was endorsed by council in 2021. And in the strategy, it had 44 action items, including the development of a CIP. A good number of these actions have been completed, and we continue to work on the implementation of the remaining action items. The city is also committed to 9 initiatives under the agreement with the CMHC for the Housing Accelerator Fund. Among these 9 initiatives are the updates to the official plan and zoning bylaw to increase permissions and density in mixed-use intensification areas, and to facilitate gentle density within neighborhoods. In addition, the city is looking at process improvements to streamline our development approvals processes, and we're also developing a concierge program for affordable housing. Lastly, the city is also updating our official plan and zoning bylaws to permit as of right 4 stories in major transit station areas, and where there are a mix of land uses supported by transit, and 4 units in neighborhoods to facilitate gentle density. So this draft CIP is just one tool among the many other measures that the city will use to facilitate more affordable and sustainably designed housing. Next slide, please. So what is a community improvement plan, or CIP? Some of this information being presented is a repeat of the May 14th council workshop, but we thought it might be helpful to provide a quick review. Next slide, please. A CIP is a tool that allows municipalities to give financial incentives for land use developments in order to achieve certain municipal goals, such as revitalizing a community area. A CIP is authorized under the Planning Act. Through CIPs, municipalities may achieve numerous land use planning objectives, including prioritizing or focusing on certain municipal initiatives, targeting a location or area that is in need of repair, rehabilitation, or redevelopment, facilitating community change in a coordinated manner, and stimulating private sector investment through the provision of municipal incentives. On the right side of the slide, it shows the three major steps needed to create a CIP, which requires a background study, the preparation of a plan, and finally, the implementation of such plan. It should be noted that the City of Richmond Hill presently has one active and enforced CIP, and this is for incentivizing the development of office buildings within our business parks and for facade improvements of buildings in the village core located near Major Mackenzie Drive and Yonge Street. Next slide, please. I'll now provide a brief overview of the CIP project. Next slide, please. The CIP we're working on is intended to facilitate the development of affordable housing and sustainably designed housing. The CIP is a result of recommendations coming out of three initiatives that were endorsed by Council, one of which is the Affordable Housing Strategy. It identified a CIP as a tool for incentivizing affordable housing and rental housing. The other two initiatives are the Community Energy and Emissions Plan and the Sustainability Metrics Program. Both of these set goals and targets to ensure that new buildings are designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the long term beyond current building code requirements. This CIP is being developed with advice from the nonprofit housing and for-profit housing sectors, along with expertise in the community. We're also very fortunate to have our consultant team to help us with this project. Next slide, please. In terms of timing and phases of this project, we have completed the first three phases. Our team completed a background study, which is available on the city's project website. We also completed stakeholder consultations, and the result was a draft CIP, which has also been posted on the project website. We are currently in phase 4, which includes a public open house, which was held virtually last week, and tonight's council public meeting. Comments received from members of the public and council at this meeting will inform the final CIP, which is anticipated to be brought before council for consideration in late fall of this year. Next slide, please. I'll now hand it over to our consultant team to provide an overview of the background report, as well as a summary of the stakeholder feedback we received.
That's great, Derek. Thank you. And hello, everyone. It's great to be back. You may remember me. I'm Nick Michael. I'm a partner at the real estate and planning consulting firm MBLC, and joined by my colleague here, Graham Stewart from ERA Architects. And together, we undertook quite a substantial amount of background research and analysis as we started to look into, what are the types of tools and incentives that we can deploy to encourage affordable housing, as well as sustainability, heightened sustainability in new buildings and construction. This work also involved, quite a bit of case study review through a jurisdictional scan of what other municipalities and communities are doing in the GTA and Ontario broadly, or Canada broadly for that matter, to encourage similar outcomes. So we did present this slide to you and some of the findings last time that we were here about a month ago. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I thought it would just be a good idea to give a little bit of a reminder to this group, and of course also the public that might be listening in, that rental housing and affordable rental housing in particular certainly have always been very challenging to deliver. York Region, Richmond Hill specifically, has not experienced a lot of rental housing, a lot of affordable rental housing in recent years. And this is just becoming more and more challenging to deliver as we're seeing construction costs and interest rates continue to escalate. Often what we're seeing now is that it can cost upwards of $150,000 to $400,000 per unit to subsidize the creation of new affordable housing. This is a big range. Some things we talked about last time. It's going to depend on a long list of factors. Of course, it's much more expensive to subsidize really deep, permanent affordable housing relative to more moderate affordable housing. But there's also a whole host of other site-specific factors that are going to come into play. How big is the project? What are the construction materials being used? How much did you pay for land? Where's the site located? How much parking? There's dozens and dozens of factors that are going to influence that subsidy level. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that it's really expensive. So to put that into perspective, a budget of around $10 million, it might secure 100 professionally managed affordable rental units every year. This is similar to what we see other programs in the GTA, Peel, Durham programs come to mind. They put about $10 million into the program each and every year, typically generating around 100 affordable units. This is also why it's become really important for any local municipal incentive program to really easily stack efficiently, effectively, no friction with the financing and funding programs that are available through CMHC and senior levels of government. This is a really, really important piece that we kept in mind, myself, Graham, the city, when we were designing this draft CIP that we're here to present today. So with that, I'll hand things over to Graham to talk a little bit about sustainable design.
Thank you, Nick. Again, Graham Stewart with ERA Architects, and we presented something very similar about a month ago. So I'll do a quick overview, but at a high level, when this project began, it was really, and the title of it is that it's about affordable housing and sustainability. So we thought very carefully about how do we use the opportunity at hand to get the best result. And I think where we've landed is that it's designed that it is really targeting and is primarily driven towards the creation of affordable units, but is doing so in a way that piggybacks off the fantastic work that Richmond Hill has done in terms of sustainability standards and planning, so that it'll be the silver level will be the baseline for anyone to apply. But because of the nature of how a lot of affordable housing is financed outside of Richmond Hill tools like FCM financing or CMHC financing, et cetera, that to access those programs, you need to hit something that's on par with the silver level or even higher. So our strong suspicion is that you'll be able to achieve that level and beyond in terms of how people, especially in nonprofits, are financing affordable housing. So it was really designed in a way to accelerate the sustainable programs and agenda, but to primarily be focused on how do we get shovels in the ground on affordable units.
You can go to the next slide. So I'll note that we did hold 2 separate stakeholder consultation sessions in early April, one with for-profit developers as well as another with nonprofits. Now, again, we did present these findings to you last month, so we won't go into excruciating detail here, but rather just to point out that, of course, the feedback that we did receive through these sessions, these are the groups that ultimately are going to be the ones taking up the program and building the affordable housing that we need. So we certainly took the comments and the feedback that they provided to us to heart when we were designing the program. And since that time, we've prepared the draft CIP, of course. We're here to present that to you all today. And we've made that available to both stakeholders and the public to comment. So something I always find happens is that when we're consulting with developers on affordable housing policies, incentive programs, and we're talking about it on a very abstract and theoretical level, certainly those discussions are great. But once we actually have a draft CIP and they're able to actually have it in front of them, look at it, review and respond, we get much more specific and targeted feedback. So from that perspective, we've continued to be meeting with stakeholders as they've requested, and we're continuing to do that over the next month or so as we look to fine tune the CIP that we're here to present today, which will of course include the feedback that we receive through this session today. I'll also just note that in addition to stakeholder consultation, we also hosted a public consultation event last week, which was very well attended. I'm finding that these sessions are attended more and more and more over the years, just because the housing crisis is getting worse and worse, and people are taking a very vested interest in affordable housing. We had a lot of really great discussion and feedback, a lot of really pointed questions from the public that did attend, but I think the overwhelming sentiment, majority of sentiment that we did receive at that session is just the urgency to try to create as much affordable housing as possible. Next slide, please. So this takes us now to the draft CIP, which I'll quickly run through. We can go to the next slide. And that starts with the structure. So the structure of this CIP is a hybrid model. Talked a little bit about the different models last time we were here, but this is a scenario where the incentives that are offered both on an automatic basis. So they're awarded if you meet the base eligibility criteria that we've established, as well as additional grant funding, additional pot of money that would be available on a competitive basis. So this proposed approach was definitely supported by the stakeholders when we met with them. It's definitely a structure that works effectively in other municipalities, as we uncovered in our best practice and jurisdictional review. But it also gives the city flexibility to not create such an onerous program at the outset with base eligibility criteria, but then to go and try to encourage developers and applicants to pursue deeper affordability, longer affordability, as well as greater sustainability in their building design. Next slide, please. And that takes us now to the base eligibility criteria. So these are the criteria that to be eligible for the incentives you must meet. And in terms of the geography, the draft CIP is proposed to apply citywide. This is a very standard approach in incentive programs. There's nothing more frustrating than when I'm helping developers and nonprofits apply to incentive programs in other jurisdictions, and they've created an artificial geography and we happen to be just outside of it. There's no ability or easy way to manipulate the CIP to amend the geography, which excludes a large number of projects. It would also target rental housing only, with rents being at or below 125% of the CMHC average market rent. This definition aligns with York Region's definition of affordable housing, as well as the city's own housing strategy that was completed a couple of years ago. These units must be affordable for at least 25 years. Of course, applicants can be both for-profit and nonprofit entities. In fact, the CIP encourages partnerships between these groups, which is something that we see in other jurisdictions that have similar incentive programs. The CIP would also allow for mixed income buildings. So this might be a scenario where a proportion of the building is affordable and another remainder of the building is at market rate. Of course, in this situation, the incentives would only apply to the affordable units. The market units would not be eligible for incentives. And from that perspective, we've introduced a minimum size threshold of 5 affordable units, as well as in the case of these mixed income buildings that I just discussed, a minimum of 15% of the units would need to be affordable. So just for example, if it was a 100 unit building, at least 15 units in that building would need to meet the definition of affordability. I will say through some of the subsequent stakeholder consultation, we have heard from groups that maybe this threshold is a little high. So it's definitely something that we're going to continue to look at over the next month as we fine tune the policy. And finally, projects must also meet the city's new silver performance level based on the sustainability metrics program. And before moving on, I'll just note that these criteria that we've established, everything from minimum project size to affordability depth to sustainability score, aligns really nicely with the senior government funding program. So we don't envision there to be any friction. In fact, it'll be very efficient for any proponent that's going to secure funding through this program to also secure their financing through the CMHC programs. Next slide, please. So in terms of the proposed incentives, these would be the automatic incentives. So the CIP would offer grants that offset fees and charges associated with development applications. So things like application fees for site plan and building permit, development charges, parkland fees, community benefit charges. And again, these would be available to every project that meets the base eligibility criteria that I just ran through on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Now, we're also proposing a tax increment equivalent grant. This is shortened to a TEAG. I'll refer to it as a TEAG when I speak to it right now. And this will offset the property tax increase resulting from the development of a new affordable project. Richmond Hill has experience with TEAGs. You offer TEAGs through your existing office CIP. Offsetting property taxes, I'll just note, is a really powerful tool for encouraging new affordable housing delivery. It's a common feature that we see in other similar programs that are successful in attracting affordable housing. And it was also strongly supported by both the nonprofit and the for-profit entities that we met with. Happy to talk more about TEAGs in the question period if we have any further questions on them. But it should be noted that the proposed TEAG would apply for 10 years for projects that meet the base eligibility criteria of 125% of the CMHC AMR. And then we're proposing that increase to 20 years for projects that are pursuing deeper affordability of 100% of CMHC AMR or below. After which, these 10 and 20-year increments, property tax payment would continue as normal. I'll also just note that the TEAG would only apply to the affordable units, just like all the incentives in the project. I mentioned that already, but it would also only cover the city of Richmond Hill's portion of the property tax. The region's portion, as well as the education portion of property tax, would still need to be paid. Of course, we're also hopeful that perhaps York Region would elect to also waive their taxes through the city CIP The legislation allows for that, and we will be having conversations with York Region as we continue to advance this policy. Next slide, please. And now that brings us to the capital grant component of the draft CIP. And this would be a competitive incentive where we're going to start seeing applicants applying and competing for a limited pool of funding. In this situation, let's say it's $5 million. And this is where we've established additional criteria. So things like pursuing deeper and longer affordability, higher sustainability scores, being able to pull a building permit in the near term, building your project in a really strategic location like a transit-oriented development site. The applicant would also be required to submit detailed pro forma and operating budgets that justify and demonstrate project feasibility, as well as the level of funding that they're requesting. Next slide, please. And finally, this now takes us to public lands, where the city may also offer public land as an incentive through the CIP. And certainly, while a specific site has not been identified at this stage, we're setting the CIP up to allow the city to offer land at a future time if the site became available. If we didn't do this, we'd have to amend the CIP later in time, which again, as I mentioned, is not an easy and straightforward process. CIPs can be a bit clunky, takes a bit of time to actually amend this. So this is something that we're doing currently with the CIP to potentially offer public lands at free or discounted rates in the future, again, to encourage affordable housing. And from that perspective, certainly a framework and structure around how that would work would need to be developed. But we envision that it would follow a similar process to the competitive grants where developers are applying and competing against each other against a set of criteria for the right to develop those sites with affordable housing. And with that, I'll hand things back over to Derek to talk about the funding and implementation of the CIP.
Great, thank you, Nick and Graham. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few slides here just regarding funding and implementation as well as next steps. Next slide, please. A community improvement plan can be funded through three primary sources: the city's property tax base, the city's community benefits charge, as well as other sources such as grants provided by other levels of government. Recently, the city of Richmond Hill was awarded $31 million from CMHC for the Housing Accelerator Fund, and a portion of this fund will be used to finance the CIP. However, it is noted that the Housing Accelerator Fund is a one-time grant with a deadline of spending by 2027. After that, the city will have to rely on the other primary sources of funding for the CIP. Next slide, please. With respect to implementation, city staff are considering a number of factors, including impacts to staff and other city resources, such as leveraging the city's affordable housing concierge program to staff in the implementation of the CIP, long-term financial impacts to the city, and we need to consider funding sources beyond the Housing Accelerator Fund, as well as the phasing of proposed incentives and determining financial resources needed to sustain the CIP in the long term. Lastly, staff will also be working on creating guidance materials to support the administration of the CIP, including working with other departments to create all the necessary forms and agreements to form the CIP project. Next slide, please. As part of the next steps, we'll be collecting and assessing feedback over the summer months, and we may hold additional meetings with the public or stakeholders upon request. The feedback and comments will help inform the final CIP, which we anticipate will bring forward to council for consideration in late fall. Pending no appeals to the CIP, we hope to implement this program by the end of this year. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. We recommend that this presentation and staff report SRBPS 24076 regarding the draft CIP for affordable housing and sustainable design be received for information purposes, and that all comments be referred back to staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I don't see anybody signed up for a delegation. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to this? No, going once, going twice. Okay, I'm going to bring this back then to council. So what I need is for the motion that was recommended in the staff report and on the screen a minute ago to be moved, and we'll get the ball rolling for discussion. So Councillor Davidson, you want to move it, and Councillor Thompson, you want to second it. So Councillor Davidson, would you like to speak to this?
Briefly, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I am a little confused about the 125%. What does that mean? That sounds higher than market value. So can someone explain to me that that metric, please?
Thank you for the question. It's very confusing. It's sort of a nomenclature that CMHC uses. So when they say 100%, what they don't mean is 100% of market rents today. You know, an apartment's available in the marketplace. I'm going to go rent it, and that equals 100%. What it is what are actually people paying in a geography? All rents. And so when you take a geography of Richmond Hill and you say, what are all of the rents being paid? It's the 100% of the average or the median of that. So some of those rents are very, very low. Some of those rents, if they were flipped over recently, are very, very high, but that's what they mean. And what we've actually found is, or what a lot of the market data shows, is that 100% is actually quite affordable in terms of that 30% or 33% of income. So it's very confusing, but basically the data set is all rents being paid in a given month. And it's the 100% means the median or average, depending on whether you're using median or average. There are two qualifiers. And which one are we using here? Average. So we're using average. CMHC publishes two data sets. Was that helpful?
Thank you. And for you, Mr. Chair, when you run those numbers, does it give even a possibly affordable number that people could live with? You know what I mean? I mean, is this number actually workable, or is it still really high? It just feels like what we want rents to be aren't what they are.
I think what we could do is actually look at what those numbers are. They're updated on a regular basis. And I think what's interesting by saying in the piece of policy that you're targeting 100, that number will shift over time. So it's sort of pegged to, it moves as the market moves. But we could sort of, I don't know if you have them handy, looking at the actual numbers. They're published on a monthly basis.
Thanks, Graham. And I'll just add to Graham's information that the 125% average market rent is considered affordable, and that number has been tested by York Region. It's also a part of their official plan definition of affordable rental housing. And the reason why it's considered affordable is because the average market rent, when we look at that data, it's actually collected by the CMHC through their rental housing survey. And their survey focuses on purpose-built rental housing. Purpose-built rental housing, for the most part, is comprised of older stock apartment buildings. So these are built in the 1990s or even earlier. And so what it means is that those older stock housing, a lot of them are actually rent controlled. They're controlled through the provincial rent guidelines. And in addition to that, if you consider new development that's happening now, these new development for rental buildings, they must comply with the current building code. And so the current building code has a requirement for energy efficiency, accessibility, and a number of these requirements, which are more stringent when compared to the older stock of the rental housing. And therefore, the prices on the new rental housing will be quite expensive when compared to the older housing stock. And that's why York Region purposely set the affordable price to be at 125% of the average market rent. I believe they also tested against the incomes, and they do fall within the 60th percentile of the renter household incomes.
Thank you. My next question is, so this program will be funded by grants. It's not ever going to go near the tax, like property taxes. It's all money we're going to figure out aside from property taxes. Can I just confirm that, please?
So all of the, through the chair, all of the grants that we're suggesting, yes, would be funded through the Housing Accelerator Fund. The only component that would not be funded through that would be the TEAG, the property tax equivalent grant, just because that would be offset on an annual basis over a 10 and 20-year period. But we have done some analysis with the city's finance department to assess the impact to the city. which is quite low. It's very modest. I think it's something like $1.50 for every residential homeowner in the city. That's what the impact might be. So it's quite a small impact. That's the only component that would not be funded through the Housing Accelerator Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's more a tax break than writing a check, right?
Correct.
That's how taxes fit in. Okay, thank you. And last question I have, can you just in a few sentences explain what sustainability means? Is that the energy efficiency and all of that stuff? And how could you, according to building codes or whatever, make it a little less stringent? Where's the wiggle room there?
I'll my colleague to answer that.
Through the chair. No, good question. So this is based on Richmond Hills. It was one of the reports shown in the beginning of this presentation, sustainability strategy. And in there's a whole series of, it's kind of a point system. If you do certain things, you can achieve silver or gold or lower than silver. And so what we're saying is that the entry point for consideration would be the silver level. When that was published, it was the silver in itself was sort of above the mean of what cities were doing. Very quickly, there's a bit of an arms race in different municipalities where the new Toronto Green Standard coming out next year is extremely onerous. Signaling on where the building code is going is onerous. So this, whereas the silver standard is head and shoulders above baseline a few years ago, it will sort of just be the mean. So I don't, this was sort of what we did. We didn't say gold, we said silver, because we didn't want it to be a disincentive. We wanted it to get people to apply to this. Achieving gold could be something that could trigger a grant application or other types of things from it. So in terms of answering your question specifically, there's no way to sort of deke out of these things. This is, I'm an architect. This is why I'm part of the team. We know what it costs to do these things. We know how these things work and come together. And what we're actually finding is a more robust build up front reduces costs significantly later. So you're de-risking your building by building a better building. And that's what these policies are doing.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I just want to say I'm excited about this. I hope it catches on, it works, because I know there's no one on this council who doesn't hope to build some affordable housing in a way that the city can afford and that actually gets built. So thank you very much to everyone who was part of the report, and keep it up. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Through the chair, like Councillor Davidson, I'm certainly excited about this. There was one thing that you mentioned that does concern me a little bit on the sustainability side, and that was when you mentioned about the funding that we're using from the Housing Accelerator Fund, in that it's only good until 2027. So I'm just thinking down the road, how are there, what types of ideas are we already coming up with once that occurs? So if you could sort of give me a bit of a prelude as to where we may be come that time, sure, that would be great.
Through the chair, staff are definitely considering what options are available after 2027. Certainly, taking a look at the CBC charges, that's already been secured at least for a small amount for the next few years, and that's probably something we would look to expand. And there's also the possibility of future grants as well that staff would be pursuing for sure.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Okay, Councillor Tree.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I similar as Councillor Davidson and also Councillor Scott Thompson's concerns regarding to the source of this funding. As we all mentioned, there are three sources. First one is tax based on basis. From my understanding is if the tax being collected from property tax from all the residents and then we're using in favor of certain of the applicants, for example, they're qualified for this type of thing, I think it's unfair for majority of the taxpayers. That's my concern. The second one, as I mentioned, the housing acceleration rates is only $3 million, just in case in the next 3 years it's being used out. So when we issue those fundings, I think there are 4 or 5 different fundings to distribute and encourage the applicants to apply for it. And I think we need to set up a threshold based on how much money we have in our pocket. If there are 20 or maybe 200 applicants submit their applications based on the numbers, there should be a threshold just in case. If the money we grant is more than, or if the applicants asking for more than what we can affordable, it might be a challenge. So better we set up threshold and set up buffers in case we use up all the money and we don't have any additional funding coming. That is my my feeling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Xu.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. And I have only a few questions. One of the question is on slide number 21. We can see one of the funding sources of the CIP is the city's tax base. So my question is, will this plan require more of the city's money? Meaning that we might have to raise taxes? Through the chair.
Okay, I'm not sure who wants to take that. I think this is a kind of a hypothetical question, but Director Flores?
Sure, through the chair, I'll take a stab at it and pass it over if anyone has additional insight. But at this point in time, I believe it was clarified, the only thing that we would be relying on the tax base is the TEAG, which amounts to about $1.58 per household. So it's a smaller percentage of the entire program. For the time being, this is a new program, so we're going to have to monitor and see what the uptake is like and how quickly it is used up. And then, obviously adjust the criteria and look at other funding sources. But at this point, that's the only tax-based source that we're looking at right now.
Okay, I see. Through the chair, my next question is on slide number 15, the draft CIP for the criteria. One of the criteria is the number of affordable units provided. We can see a minimum of 15% of the units provided in the development must meet the definition of affordability. So my question is, I'm just wondering why we have not set the minimum percentage at 35% instead, as that's our target to achieve. Through the chair.
That's a really good question. And I think it comes down to the fact of who are we expecting to take up this program? If it's small nonprofits, this threshold really doesn't come into play at all. They're doing 100% affordable. But if we're thinking about some of the larger rental buildings that get built, that are built by REITs, that are built by pension funds, these are big buildings. And they tend to, if we put the threshold of the building that needs to be affordable really high, like if we're envisioning a 500 unit building and 50% needs to be affordable, that's 250 units. That is a lot of funding that's necessary to advance those units. And coming back to Councillor Chu's comment, probably Richmond Hill doesn't have the funding to incentivize that many units in one project. And even if we did, it would suck up all the funding with one single development. So that's why having really high thresholds like this certainly sounds like a good idea in practice. But when you start thinking about practically the types of projects that are going to come forward, it just results in a lot of units being necessary within these buildings. And I think the City of Toronto's open door program is a really good example of this. They started with a threshold around 15%, and they got a lot of really good appetite and interest from a lot of different participants. And then they increased it to 30 and 35%, and it's really slowed down as a result. So we're being very cautious about how high we set that threshold. I think if we think about it in terms of, if Cadillac Fairview or Oxford Properties, RioCan, some of the big groups wanted to build a rental building and they had a big project and they wanted to include 10% or 15% of their units as affordable, and we had the threshold set at 30% as an eligibility criteria, they would not be able to apply and receive incentives through this program. They would not be able to advance affordable housing. So that's why we set the thresholds where we did, and just trying to make it a lot more permissive to enable the widest range of outcomes that would be possible to encourage the most amount of affordable housing that we can.
I see. Through the chair, my comment is it's good to know that the HAF, supported by $31 million, allocated by the federal government, can be used to subsidize for building more affordable housing. My question is there any specific percentage allocated for spending on affordable housing, or is it totally determined by the city regarding how much of the HAF is used for affordable housing? Through the chair.
Director Flores.
Through the chair, the total amount for the half is actually going to be divided between the 9 action items. It hasn't been solidified as to the exact amount or percentage for the CIP grant program. We have an estimate of about $20 million for this. Having said that, I do want to point out that the staff report identifies the fact that there is still the possibility that we may not receive all of the half funding because it does come in installments and it's predicated on meeting certain targets and milestones. So that 20 million may be reduced just to reduce our risk for the city, but that's the guesstimated amount that would be devoted for this program.
See. Through the chair, my last question, I'm not sure that if this question is related to the presentation or not, but I try asking to see if it's good to go. Is it feasible to mandate that 35% of the development must be allocated to affordable housing to meet our target when the builders submit their application? Through the chair.
So unfortunately, outside of the use of inclusionary zoning, we can't mandate that developers build affordable housing. And even with inclusionary zoning, it's capped at 5%. So we can, on the other hand, through this incentive program, as I was discussing earlier, increase the eligibility criteria, increase that threshold to 30% if we wanted to, but it would be problematic in terms of take up and feasibility. And of course, also the city's budget to fund that magnitude of affordable housing that ultimately comes forward.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all about my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am very confused about the 125% of the average market rent. So thank you, Councillor Davidson, for asking. Further on that, I kind of now understand what the 125% means, but how can one achieve that? There's so many, variables. Average market rent we cannot control. We want to automatically award it to projects that, that can guarantee the 125%. But how can one achieve that? I don't quite understand that. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Be the third try at answering this question. In terms of achieving, so yeah, 125% of average market rent. It's the worst term to use, average market rent, because it's not average market rent. Exactly as Chun and Graham mentioned, it's the total rent roll of a building, right? So we have all these old purpose-built rental buildings. Some people have been living in there for 30, 40 years, not that long, 20 years, 30 years, rent controlled. So the rent that they're paying is in no way reflective of the rent that they would pay if they moved out and that unit became available for occupancy. Market rents in Richmond Hill, and there's not a lot of new market buildings, but market rents in York Region are much around 200, 225, 250% of average market rent. So when we talk about 100% of average market rent, 125% of average market rent, these are quite affordable, impossible to achieve in the private market without subsidy, without funding, are not achieved in the private market without subsidy, without funding. The reason we use these benchmarks, that everyone uses these benchmarks, it comes from the provincial definition through the region, through the city of Richmond Hill's own official plan, own affordable housing strategy, is because this is just CMHC's term. CMHC collects this data and they release it and publish it every single year. They make the data available. So as affordability pressures have evolved and shifted, the definitions that are used in these different affordable housing programs also shift. We're seeing 100% of average market rent used to be the benchmark that everyone was using. As affordability really started to increase and we start to see affordability pressures extend upwards on the income spectrum, 125, 150% of average market rent are now starting to be used as affordability benchmarks. At the same time, we're starting to see 80%, 60% of AMR start to be used for more deeply affordable. So in terms of achieving these types of outcomes with our nonprofit and our for-profit partners, subsidies, funding programs exactly like this, as well as from senior levels of government, are absolutely necessary. And in terms of securing these entitlements over the long term, that's where these contribution agreements come into play, where applicants that are approved through the program, they sign a contribution agreement, it's registered through council, it's registered on the title of the property, where the developer is required to prove every single year that the units that they're renting out that received incentive are being rented out to someone with an appropriate income and are rented out at the rent levels that they agreed to.
Thank you. All right. My next question is, it has to be guaranteed the development project remain affordable for at least 25 years. Again, how?
So in
25
terms
years.
of the how, that's where these contribution agreements come into play, where the developer is required to prove to the municipality to report annually every year that the units that they're renting out are rented at the rates that are agreed to and to a tenant whose income is appropriate. If they do not adhere to these requirements and are found to be in non-compliance, the contribution agreement will spell out that they have to repay the incentives on a prorated basis based on the affordable term that they agreed to. So for 25 years, at minimum, the developer is going to be submitting occupancy reports to the city's affordable housing office, who's going to be checking to make sure that they're in compliance. And if they're not, the incentives will be repaid on a prorated basis. So if they are in compliance for 10 of the 20 years, using 20 to not do quick math on the spot, half of the incentive that they received would have to be repaid back because they only made it 50% of the way of their agreed upon commitment.
Oh, I see. Thank you for the clarification. So throughout all the public consultation meeting with the stakeholder, do we hear anyone, profit or non-profit, already showing interest in doing work in Richmond Hill? I say, well, come on, I need the CIP as soon as possible. I wanted to apply. Do we hear anything?
Yes, actually, we had 3 really, really amazing sessions, not only with the public, but also really targeted sessions with both nonprofit and for-profit groups. Both the nonprofits are always very eager. They just need money, right? If we funded the nonprofits as we did in the 70s and the 80s, they'd be building like they did in the 70s and the 80s. They are very eager to advance projects, and it's the perfect time to be funding them because they have a lot of projects now that were built with 50-year amortization loans that are now coming due, which is freeing up these sites that are typically really low intensity townhome sites, low scale apartments that can be revitalized and redeveloped with developer partnerships into a much larger scale development. So the nonprofits are quite eager, and so are the for-profit entities. What we're seeing now is it's such an interesting time in the market. As someone who works with developers really closely, the condo market, which has been, king for quite a while, is facing just unprecedented challenges now with investor interest just pulling out. At the same time, we're seeing really strong incentives being offered by the federal and provincial governments, HST waivers, really strong incentive programs through CMHC, as well as local municipalities offering incentives. So it's such an interesting time to start seeing the REITs as well as other developers who otherwise may have done a condo start to look to rental and certainly start to look to affordable rental to unlock the cheap financing as well as the grants and subsidies that are available. So I would say that this is the perfect time to be advancing a program like this. And we're seeing a lot of interest, especially relative to incentive programs I was doing 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe 3 or 4 groups would come. I believe that we had over 10, 12 groups in each of our sessions. So the interest has been very strong.
Thank you. Good to hear that. I think the second last question, kind of lost my train of thought. Okay, so the CIP, all municipalities are competing for the same limited funding. Am I correct? So there's only so much money, but all cities are are trying to get a big share of it, correct?
In terms
Through
of the
you,
Housing
Mr.
Accelerator Fund, absolutely. I believe all municipalities were competing for that limited application window, and Richmond Hill was very lucky to be one of the municipalities to receive that funding. Certainly not all municipalities did. And there's even examples in the GTA of municipalities who have had their Housing Accelerator funds taken away because they're not advancing the types of strategies that they agreed to in their application.
If I may add, sorry, Councillor, if I just may add one thing to that, is that when the HAF funding was announced, I was very concerned at that time that we make sure that we weren't dilly-dallying in getting our application in, because what I predicted would happen is they would run out of funds and there were municipalities that weren't definitive enough about it didn't get it. And so we were, I mean, I'm not sure how many in we were, but we were in the York region. I think we might have been the second in. And I think that was very important because the competition for HAF is kind of over now. And, you know, we were successful.
No, I think, that's thank you. So I think what the question I'm trying to ask is, this CIP is so important that we are also competing with other cities, in terms of the CIP. So I think my question is our CIP competitive enough? Do we need to be more aggressive in providing incentive? Just a question. I don't know.
That's a
question.
really great question.
Yeah.
And certainly within this project has actually taken a very interesting course, because when we started, there wasn't even a Housing Accelerator Fund. It was not something that was talked about. So we were wrestling and grappling with how do we incentivize all these outcomes coming from the property tax base, predominantly a little bit through community benefit charge. It would have been very challenging to incentivize the types of things that we're looking to incentivize currently, and certainly at the scale that we need it. So absolutely, the Housing Accelerator funds has dramatically changed this picture. And you're absolutely right that municipalities across Ontario right now are advancing CIPs. City of Mississauga is advancing their program. We're helping the City of London advance one. This is definitely happening. The good news, or I don't know if it's good news or bad news, is just that the affordability crisis, affordable housing crisis, is just so immense and extreme. We can never pour enough money into this to the point where there is going to be competition for group amongst all the nonprofits, all the developers that are looking to advance projects, especially given how challenged the market rate housing market is right now. We're just not seeing the same competition that we would have seen probably 3-4 years ago for labor. So certainly from my perspective, if we wanted to get more aggressive with funding and there was more funding available, I would be all ears for that. And we could definitely start to incorporate, you know, greater incentives, or even within the same structure of CIP that we currently have, increase the capital pool that we're thinking about. There's always more money that we can filter into this program. And certainly I think the project team would be all ears if more money and more funding through the city were to be made available.
Thank you. Okay, my last question. So I see city-owned lands. Do we own any lands? Do we actually need to include that into the CIP? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Director Flores?
Through the chair, we do own a substantial amount of land. Whether it qualifies for something that is suitable for affordable housing is another question. There is another initiative actually under the HAF action plan and our affordable housing strategy where we have done an inventory of public lands that we own that could potentially be conveyed to the region. And that was based on a regional council motion a couple of years ago. So we have been in talks with York Housing. This is all very early days in terms of our discussions. Which I'm not at liberty to include the details. It won't be included as part of this HAF program right now, just because of the pace and some of the other complications that I guess are being weighed in whether this is conveyed or not. But as our consultant had pointed out, this clause is or this condition or I guess option is included in our CIP in the event that in the future more lands become available, and then we are able to readily incorporate it as part of the CIP.
So thank you very much. Yeah, that's all.
Okay. seeing no other speakers at the moment, I do have a few questions, or actually comments, I guess, mostly. So the way I see this, and I spent an inordinate amount of time as mayor thinking about these types of things lately. We have this giant problem where we don't have enough housing that's affordable for the number of people and in the range of incomes that we need to house. And this has lots and lots of different outcomes and problems and related issues that go with it. But the good news is there's probably such a demand for affordable housing, or housing that is affordable, not affordable housing that is affordable, that, there's lots of things that we could do that probably will be successful. And I think that that's important. The bad news is the amount of resources and money that is required to make the kinds of incentives that will change the behavior of builders to do the things that we really, really need them to do is quite large. And I can tell you right now that none of us, I'm sure, on council are willing to jack up the our tax rate to accommodate this kind of thing. And I think that's a bad idea. I think, really at the end of the day, property tax is not designed to be doing things that are directly related to housing, which really is a provincial and or federal responsibility. And that's why the Housing Accelerator Fund is key to this. This is the linchpin for this entire program, because if we don't get that kind of funding from an upper level of government, we can't afford to do this alone. We can nibble around the edges, and we have done some of that stuff. We've improved our development process to make it more streamlined. We have a concierge program and some of the other things that have been talked about here. But none of that is going to be a deal changer. Like it's not on its own. It is not, but we are doing that work. We've already shown that we're doing that work. What we need right now is other levels of government to step up and be a part of the solution. Quite honestly, the Housing Accelerator Fund right now, in my mind, is probably one of the only direct big things that I see happening right now. The province, they could be stepping up and adding to the funding. They did that in Quebec. The Housing Accelerator Fund came out and the province matched it. That makes sense. That gives us double the bang for our buck. So, I see this as a rather imperfect solution to a very, very big problem. But I really believe that staff has worked very hard on this, and there is no question in my mind that it will make a difference. I've been spending a lot of time telling anybody that's a stakeholder in the development industry and the not-for-profit industry to keep their eyes open, because the CIP is coming. It's going to be a fairly short timeline when it's ready, and the Housing Accelerator Fund money will expire, and we need all hands on deck, and they need to be ready for it when it starts to happen. And the question that was asked earlier about is there any interest out there? Yes, there's a lot of interest. In fact, I'm quite surprised. There's people that are interested because they know about this, and then there are people that didn't know about it. I've told them about it, in general terms, and it's like, that I might be able to use that to accelerate a project that, I wasn't going to do until sometime late in the future, but maybe I'll do it now. The deadline for the half funding is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because when the CIP is ready, they're going to need to execute quickly. And it's a curse because when it's over, where there's no certainty as to whether it'll be reimbursed or re-topped up again from the federal government. But in the meantime, that timeline and the ability for us to say, well, developers, you've got a period of time here to pull the trigger. Let's get going. We have lots and lots and lots of units in Richmond Hill that are ready to go or almost ready to go. We need an incentive to say, okay, we need them to be built, and we need them to be built now, not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now. We need them to be built now. So I think that this is not perfect. And if we're looking for perfection, we're not going to find it here. But if we're looking for something that can make a difference, I think we will. In the time that I have left, I'll just say there's no one in this city or this province that is not impacted or will not be impacted by the lack of affordable housing in communities. Even if you are a person that doesn't need affordable housing, you rely on an economy that we all share that needs people to live in the community, that are doing jobs that probably aren't being paid enough to live in this community. And eventually those folks are going to find out that some other community is more affordable and the same job can be found in that community. And guess what? They're going to move to that community. So the business that needs those workers is going to lose out, and that's going to affect us all. So I'm over time, but I will say I do thank the staff for this. I actually have one question, which I'll leave for a second round if no one else needs to speak. Is there any other second round questions? Okay, if I may then, what happens when the Housing Accelerator Fund runs out, and what happens if we don't use it all in the first round? Is there a definitive answer on that yet?
Could you just please repeat that question?
Okay, so two questions. So the Housing Affordability Fund has a deadline. There's no indication at this time that we will get more money past that point, right? Okay, so that's an unknown. What happens if we haven't spent that pool of money by the deadline?
Through the chair, it's a question we can take back for additional clarification, but my understanding overall for the HAF initiatives is if we don't meet some of our milestone targets for the action plan, then we don't get the full percentage allotted for that action plan.
And in most cases, it's not like we have to give it back. We just won't get the full amount of money.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, there is an advocacy piece here that I will be taking on, maybe not immediately, but soon, to say, look, this is something that we need in a long-term and sustainable way, because if we're going to make a dent on housing affordability, this is not like a 2-year time frame isn't going to make it's not going to make the earth rotate differently. We're going to need longer-term, more sustainable funding from all levels of government in order to continue this. But the good news is, if we have this program in place, then we are ready for it going forward. But I will say that, there was a concern that was raised, I think, by Councillor Hsu, and I agree, and I'll reiterate, once the HAF money runs out, there needs to be another pool of money coming from a place other than the municipal tax base in order to refurbish that fund, because we cannot putting like that quantum of funding on the municipal tax base. So, I will continue to be advocating for more sustainable funding for programs like this and others, frankly, that we need in order to make the difference. If the government is really serious about meeting its overall housing targets, they're going to have to be coming to the table with some resources. It's that simple. So, okay, any other questions on a second round? Do we have a motion before us? Thank you, everybody, for the discussion. It was good. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries and unanimously. So thank you very much. So the second item that we have to deal with is a official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 8790 Yonge Street. So we've got a couple pieces of correspondence that we'll receive as well on that. And I think we have Senior Planner Taniolo for a presentation on this application.
Good evening, Mayor West, members of council, and members of the public. Tonight's agenda item involves proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications by Ontario Numbered Company 1921318 Ontario Inc. for lands municipally known as 8790 Yonge Street. Next slide, please. Thank you. The subject lands are located on the west side of Yonge Street, south of Roosevelt Drive, across from where High Tech Road terminates at Yonge Street, and has a lot area of 0.7 hectares or 1.74 acres. The lands currently contain an existing automobile dealership and service shop. The property abuts existing single-family residential to the southwest and northwest, an existing truck dealership to the north, and Yonge Street to the east. Next slide, please. The property has a split designation under the official plan. The front portion is designated Richmond Hill Center, and the rear portion is designated neighborhood. The Richmond Hill Center designation permits medium and high-density residential uses, major office, major retail, commercial, community uses, parks, live-work units, and development is intended to achieve a density range between 2 and 2.5 floor space index per development block. The neighborhood designation in behind permits low, medium density residential uses, neighborhood commercial uses, and community uses. With the adoption of the Richmond Hill Secondary Plan on May 10th, 2023, the property is within the lands comprising the secondary plan area. The secondary plan was subsequently approved by York Region Council on October 11th, 2023, with minor modifications. It is noted that 2 appeals have been received, including an appeal by the owner of the subject lands. Next slide, please. Okay. The property is located within the west of Yonge character area under the secondary plan, which is an area that is characterized by mid and high-rise mixed-use developments that provide for appropriate transitions to the existing community. For planning context, the west of Yonge character area permits an average built-out density ranging between 2 and 3 floor space index. Next slide, please. In terms of zoning, the lands are currently zoned General Commercial 2, GC2 zone pursuant to bylaw 2523 as amended, which permits the automobile dealership that is there with site-specific development standards to facilitate that dealership. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed site plan. The applicant is proposing to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw to permit a high-density mixed-use commercial residential development on its land holdings. The proposed development is to be comprised of a 23-story building with 395 apartment units, a floor space index of 4.2, and 4 levels of underground parking. Pedestrian access to the building is proposed from the north, south, and west sides of the building, with vehicular access proposed for the for parking and loading from the west end of the building, along with a lay-by pickup drop-off lane along the south side of the building. In accordance with the secondary plan street network, the applicant is proposing a north-south local street and an east-west collector street linking the north-south local street with Yonge Street and High Tech Road beyond. The applicant is further proposing to use the undeveloped lands to the west of the north-south local street for public open space. They're proposing a park. Staff are currently reviewing this proposal with current needs as provided for in the city parks plan and the secondary plan, and will be engaging with the applicant as the application process moves forward. Next slide, please. The next few slides show the proposed elevations and the rendering of the building. So what you see here is the front and rear facades of the building. Next slide, please. What you see here is the north and south faces of the building. The proposed building will have step backs at the 7th, 13th, 15th, and penthouse levels of the building. Next slide, please. This is a rendering of what the building will look like. As it's completed, you can see the lower level, which is going to be the continued use of the dealership. And then you have the residential units above. Next slide, please. Okay, the purpose of the reports, SRCM 24-05, is to provide counsel and the public with an overview of the applicant's developer proposal, and has been structured for information purposes with the recommendation that all comments be referred back to staff for consideration. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Taniolo. And I understand that we've got Arthur Grabowski to speak about this particular application on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, members of council. Name's Arthur Grabowski. I'm with the planning partnership representing the developer on the file at 8790 Yonge. I'm delighted to be here tonight to present our official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application, as well as this important economic and housing opportunity that assists with the implementation of the new Richmond Hill secondary plan. Next slide, please. So just to provide an aerial and a bit of a context as to the site's position within the secondary plan area, as well as the Richmond Hill Center, provincially PMTSA and Urban Growth Center. So you can see the site shown in pink there, and it's located within 400 meters walk or just distance from the new high-tech subway station, as well as the various other transit options that currently exist there today. Next slide, please. Ferdy has introduced the site within the secondary plan. We are within the West of Yonge character area. The minimum density and maximum density are between 2 and 3. However, the secondary plan allows for individual sites to exceed that 3, provided the character area densities do not exceed the overall character area density that's permitted. There's also an application of an angular plane requirement that's within the secondary plan. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of some ongoing development activity within the West of Yonge character area. A few of these are under construction, as well as the one located at Garden Drive just to the south is approved at an FSI of 4.92. Next slide. Just to highlight the existing automotive uses that are currently on the site. The site is currently a Thornhill, a dealership use for Land Rover. It's been there for a while. It's an important source of jobs. 65 high-paying jobs currently exist within that dealership. The site currently is a lower density and does not currently implement the secondary plan. However, it's an important source of jobs that's important to be maintained and balance out the residential growth that's occurring within the Richmond Hill Center. Next slide, please. And this is just a snapshot of some various other projects that we've been working on for this same client. The project at the sort of the bottom right of my screen there is located at 550 Adelaide East. So this is quite an interesting model in which we're intensifying existing dealerships, keeping the jobs on site, including the dealerships, primarily the retail function at grade, activating the street, enhancing the frontages, bringing the use closer to the street, whereas our current use on site actually has a very set back dealership in a previous kind of model. While relegating a lot of the service function for these dealerships either below grade, off-site, keeping kind of the edges softer. So this is kind of an interesting model that we've seen. I'm showing another example in Vaughan, where the dealership is located at grade by the same client. So this is really an important kind of balance between provincial policies, the expectations for intensification on the site, while also allowing for these important jobs to remain in Richmond Hill. Next slide, please. And this is an image of the rendering from a different perspective, just showing kind of the terraced approach that we've taken to the massing. So at grade, we have sort of a 6-story base building and then slowly terracing upwards to a height of 23 stories and quite a slender tower floor plate within the 15th and the 23rd story. The proposal also includes a very distinctive integrated mechanical penthouse, which helps make an architectural statement. And you can really see how the proposal has been designed within an angular plane requirement to help transition towards the existing areas primarily to the west. Next slide, please. Actually, if I can just remain, I'll talk a little bit about parking because it is important just to talk about how the dealership will use its parking and how the residents will use this parking. So the dealership will have 60 spaces within the site, and then residents will have benefit of 200 spaces. As mentioned before, there'll be 395 units within the building. And then this is another image of the site plan. Colored in blue is the road network that's proposed by our proposal. There's a northwest road that has been designed and implements the secondary plan, which identifies the north-south road. There's a proposed connection to the existing high-tech road, which is located just adjacent to the site to the east. As mentioned, there is a significant open space contribution, including a park, which is located to the west. And that park really serves 2 functions. Firstly, the secondary plan identifies a linear park just to the south of us, which continues with the north-south road. And the park that we've proposed helps kind of create that softer edge, create that balance, and really actually provide additional physical separation distance beyond the angular plane between our development as well as the nearby uses that are lower density and scale. Next slide, please.
Okay, your time is up, so if you can wrap up, that would be great.
Okay. So I've talked a bit about the dealership and kind of the model. This is a rendering that actually just shows how we're proposing to animate the Yonge Street frontage, and you can see the animation there. Next slide, please. I think we've talked at length about the transition and kind of the approach we're taking here. This is kind of the design of the tower and the various elements. Next slide, please. We've demonstrated on this slide just how the angular plane aligns with the proposal and how we've sculpted it. You can see that there is even a bit of room above kind of the angular plane at the highest story for additional height. However, we've chosen kind of a terrace design that terraces down towards the proposed public street. And then on the west side there, you can see the additional parkland, which actually buffers the site further.
You're quite over your time now, so you're getting close.
You know what, with that, I will open it up for questions. I recognize I'm over time, and maybe I'll pass it back for questions. And then if there are any other details I can provide, I'll respond to those.
Thanks very much. Yeah, we've got somebody else delegating as well. So the next person who's asked to delegate and signed up is, let me see here, is Marianne Escoffery. And I hope I've said that right.
Oh, you did. Way to go.
All right. I've been practicing all day, actually. So
Okay,
welcome.
so hi.
Thanks very much for being here, and you've got 5 minutes to speak to council.
Okay, so I'm actually lot 29 on that plan. So this is happening right in my backyard. And as you can understand, it's quite disturbing to me. The biggest problem I have is this does not align with the secondary plan. There's a part to it that's the boot that's backing on to all the neighborhood of houses here. The other concern I have is the traffic congestion with increased development in the area without the subway here, the straight on existing infrastructure and inconvenience residents, the environmental impact, the aesthetics and everything else, and the character of the area is going to be in, it's going to change everything on our street. As it stands, we already have a condo going up where the Emerald Isle Hotel is. We don't even know if there's going to be an entrance to that. And now they want to put up another condo. I think it was when Metris gave us this extra land and they wanted to put up, they tried for a condo then and it was turned down, and they put in a car dealership and gave everybody another 3 meters of land. So as I said, I'm backing right onto this. And when you say secondary plan, I went to all these meetings and I tried getting in touch with councillors, and no one told me what are they going to do with Eleanor Circle, because I've heard that in the master plan of Richmond Hill, there's also a road that's supposed to go in from Langstaff all the way to where Hillcrest Mall is. So we're concerned because there's a park here. There's young families. I've been in here since 1997. It's a lovely neighborhood, but we're getting squished in here. So what are you planning on doing with our neighborhood? And the subway's not going to be here for another 7 years, I'm sure, at least. And as it stands, you can't even get out of Roosevelt and onto Yonge Street. If there's a lineup turning left onto High Tech, like people are going to get killed eventually, shortly, if they don't put in a light there. So now with this other thing, and they're going to put another roadway in there. The other thing is the traffic, not the traffic, the sound, the noise, the confusion. Believe it or not, we have a lot of animals in this neighborhood. I can see it's going to affect that too. We do have lots of different things. So I think I've said what I need to say, but we have a lot of concerned residents about all these condos. And I know the Richmond Hill has a plan, but the subway's got to come first, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Escoffery. That was well said. And what we'll do at this point is we'll open this up to anybody else in the audience that would like to speak. Come on up, ma'am. And if you can just state your name and address for the record, and you've got 5 minutes to address council as well.
Thank you. My name is Minzy Kim. I'm actually a resident at Eleanor Circle, and I echo a lot of what Marian has said. Plus, what I think the question that I would like to pose today is really understanding, do we have enough infrastructure to support high residential building, including school? Right now at Charles Howitt Public School, it is already a very popular school where other areas of the city parents borrow addresses in our neighborhood to register kids into the school. As well, from last year to this year, there was a school population increase of 200 plus students within one single year because of every summer condo is closing in this neighborhood that is actually the feeder for our Charles Public Howitt School. There are portables going up every year. At this rate, the way that the council and the city approves the development plan and the condos going up and opening, soon enough, the school's not gonna be able to accommodate. And if you actually talk to York Region School District Board and compare the population number between Langstaff High School and Charles Howitt Public School Elementary School has more children than the one in high school. So that's pretty concerning that I think we really need to consider, because there are a lot of young families moving into the neighborhood, and I don't think any of that is being taken care of. Secondly, the traffic is major concern, and also, but at the same time, the existing residents' real estate value as well. If you actually look at Eleanor Circle, it's a closed circle, enclosed, that creates a very homey feel to it. There is a definite real estate value of it because it has almost a cul-de-sac feel to it. If you start building high-rise buildings and actually open it with a public space, it's definitely going to lose its charm. And there are a lot of people investing a lot of money into that circle that I think we should also think about protecting other people's assets as well as looking into, at a macro level, how can we find more housing that is affordable for the community. The other part that I also wanted to mention is privacy concerns and also the crime rate concerns. When you have high-rise buildings, and I know this because I'm from the city, where we owned a house where there are many apartment and condo buildings overlooking our backyard. In that neighborhood, no one could ever put anything outside in their backyard because things got stolen very, very easily. And that is because we're not pointing fingers at people who live in high-rise buildings, but we do not know who is visiting, who is looking over our backyard. That is a privacy concern. And although also it opens up a risk that there could be higher crime rate. The neighborhood itself is very, if you go to any park or playground and you talk to other moms, we hear very frequently about so-and-so's house had break-ins and things like that. So this is an area that not only do you approve a construction, but also think about with the infrastructure wise, do we need to do anything about this neighborhood security concerns or anything like that? That should be also taken into consideration. I understand that finding more housing is a key concern within the entire country, but at the same time, please do take into consideration of what the existing residents feel when you bring up change like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, sir? No, okay. All right, so we'll bring it back to council. This is a Ward 5 location, so we'll bring it first to Councillor Silovitz, who will move the motion to receive all the comments and refer them back to staff. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, we're not making any decisions on this particular application today. So go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you very much. I have to apologize for my voice. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank our planning staff and the applicant for their presentations. I want to thank the delegates who spoke, and I also want to thank anybody who sent in communication through emails. I had one resident on Eleanor Circle who contacted me through email as well. So I understand. I want our residents to understand that we understand your concerns. However, this is the Richmond Hill Center secondary plan. And when we were designing it, I was very firm that the west side of Yonge in Ward 5 was to be protected. So through our secondary plan, we have protected it as much as possible. With regards to concerns about infrastructure, I can tell everybody, and I think our regional counterparts can speak to that as well, that nothing is built in York Region unless York Region approves it, and York Region knows that they approves any further infrastructure that either has to be built or infrastructure that is in place at the moment. So I just wanted to point that out. With regards to crime, while I understand what the delegate was saying, crime is a policing matter, and it's very difficult to discuss that in this forum. I understand your concerns, but it's very difficult to discuss that in this forum. With regards to the school, we don't decide on which schools have to be built when and where. That is completely and utterly under the jurisdiction of the school boards. So if you do have concerns about the schools, I would suggest respectfully that you speak to our school trustees and the board for York Region District School Board, and they will be able to have a much more fulsome discussion with you in that regard. There are a few problems with this particular application. Firstly, I would like to say that I was really disappointed that the applicant never got in touch with me or my office. And I wish they had, because I would have been able to sit down with them and perhaps have a good discussion with them about what's in front of us. Because it's on the Yonge Street corridor, the intensification corridor, the regional councillors would also be involved, because they would have to be given their input and their comments. But that never occurred. So I would like to urge the applicant to please get in touch with my office so that we can sit down and continue the discussion about what is being proposed here. And also, if I would like the applicant, really urge the applicant to continue collaborative discussions with our planning staff so that we can come to some kind of middle ground, I use that very vicariously, understanding of what we would like to see here. I just made a few notes. What has to be looked at still is the tower footplate. We have to look at the angular plane, which can accommodate a 23-story building, despite there being a 15-story maximum in the secondary plan. This is permitted to be appealed under the Planning Act. And this particular applicant is one of two who have actually appealed our secondary plan to the Ontario Land Tribunal. I also wanted to say that usually I have a residents meeting prior to a council public meeting, but unfortunately in this particular case, it was not possible because the applicant wanted to compress the timeline, going from a very specific CAP planning. Can I just finish, Mr. Mayor? I'm almost finished. They wanted to compress the timeline. And as a result of that, we were unable to organize a residents meeting. And I was also unable to organize a meeting to have a discussion with the applicant and our mayor and regional councillors. So we're right at the beginning of this process. We will continue to have discussions. Nothing is being decided yet. I ask that the residents who spoke here tonight, please contact me. The first resident, I'm not sure, I don't recognize your name. Generally, my office returns phone calls. Please contact me on my email address, and I will make sure that we have a proper discussion. So that's about all from me, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry it's so difficult for me to talk. I know that there will be much more discussion involved here. And I know that our regional councillors and the mayor will also continue those discussions, as well as Ward 6 Councillor Xu, who's across the road. I can't talk anymore. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks very much. Councillor Xu, do you want to second the motion to receive all comments and refer them back to staff?
Yes, of course. I'd like to second the motion and would like to ask some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding this development, I have two concerns. The first one is the development does not meet the affordable housing target, which is 35%. That's the first point. The second point is, despite the building's step-down shape facing west, it still appears to be too close to the nearby residents, and it may potentially lead to privacy issues. That's the two issues I'm most concerned about. But at the same time, we understand that this development is located within the walkable area of the secondary plan, just right across from the subway terminal in the future, and within the MTSA. So I would expect that people will likely rely on public transportation rather than driving their own cars at that point. And so it's a tough decision. And most importantly, there has been no communications from the applicant. Like Councillor Simpson said, there's no communication from the applicant. No one approached me. And the rest, and also the residents living on the east of Yonge Street, there's no communication from there. So I believe it would be best to leave all these issues in the OLT hearing. And I'm not going to get into all details here. My last question is maybe to the city. Is there a timeline for completing this development? Do you have any timeline for this? Because it's crucial. Through the mayor.
Who would like to take that? Go ahead, Mr. Arulo.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the question itself, are you asking what the timeline is for the development to actually be constructed and occupied, or the timeline associated with the process to approve the application?
My question is regarding the construction to be completed, and the buildings will be right there.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. There would be subsequent processes to follow this process in terms of a site plan that would be required in order to construct this building in addition to the building permit process itself. At this stage, we're not aware of the developer's timelines in terms of the actual construction of this building. And we would not be in a position to compel them to construct this building within any timeline. So this would be establishing zoning and official plan permissions with those subsequent processes being subject to further application processes.
That means that
perhaps
maybe
the applicant may have some further information in terms of their plans on actually constructing this building. I'm not sure if there's a comment. But from the staff's perspective, we don't have any details.
Through the chair, can I have a question to the applicant?
Yeah, if you can answer that briefly, go ahead.
Yeah, just about the timeline. Do you have any timeline or rough idea when the building will be built? And right
at the podium. Councillor, go ahead.
Through the chair, I'll keep this very brief. I don't have a timeline for construction. I just want to respond to an earlier comment. We did have a very robust kind of pre-application process. We've been deemed complete, and we're looking forward to next steps, including speaking with the councillors. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I see. So that means that maybe in the next 5 years, maybe 10 years later, maybe 15 years later, 20 years later, who knows? So I don't have enough information to have a further comment. That's all my question. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Tree.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My fourth question regarding to the basement. I see there are four layers of the parking lot underground. I seldom see this type of designs. So my question here is because now it's a car dealer. What's the purpose of those 4 stories basement parking? Is for car dealers or is also for the residents there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think as the applicant also highlighted in his presentation, about 60 spots out of the 260 spots proposed would be dedicated to the car dealership for the commercial use, in addition to some visitor parking, and the 200 spaces would be, the remaining 200 spaces would be allocated to the residential. 395 units and 200 spaces allocated.
Okay, my understanding is the parking lot not only using for residents, also for commercial as well. This way the car dealer can park their car underground. The second question regarding to the owner of this land. I'm just because the motive, the background. Why I'm asking is I want to see who is owner of this applicant, who is the owner of this piece of land. If this land is owned by the car dealer, and now they put a motion applicants not only build up the commercial, they also build up the additional commercial for residents as residential areas. Is this the right information? Who is the owner of this piece of land?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the owner of this property is a numbered company, but we understand that that the owner of the car dealership is also associated with the number. So we understand that there is an association between the existing car dealership and the numbered company owns this property.
So the motivation here behind this applicant, I'm assuming, is a car dealer partner with the landowner to become co-owner, and they both propose this proposal. Is that right?
Through Mr. Chair, we don't know the exact structure of the ownership of this property and how that numbered company is ultimately owned, but we understand that there is an association between the car dealer and the property owner, and that the interest in the property, the applicant's interest in the property is to maintain automobile. I'm not sure associated.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Anthony's statements are correct. It is the dealership that is our client. And they are in the car business. This is just one of the models in development that they do. They have different dealerships that they intensify, and they just do a standalone dealership. They have dealerships that they do as mixed use buildings. So this was just one of the things I wanted to highlight. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, got it. So the land belongs to the car dealer, and also they want to build up some residential area above the top of the existing commercial. Got it. In the history of this piece of land, is there any existing or previous proposals? This land being there for using for 20, 30 years. My question here is, do we have any previous applications or proposals on this piece of land?
Mr. Chair, we understand that it's been operated as a car dealership for quite some time, and we don't have any existing or any additional applications on this property. And I think the report itself outlines its current permissions.
Just new one.
As to both zoning and official designations.
Thank you so much. My next question will be regarding to this the existing or approved buildings near this building. I think the residents mentioned city already approved a certain of the building nearby. I'm just wondering from a density perspective, what is the height or densities nearby to this location from the either south side or north side? I see there is one slide mentioned the densities nearby. Is there any, can we readdress that one? I just see how densities or how many approved units around this area.
Mr. Chair, as I understand it, the highest density building that's currently proposed in the rest or approved building that brought forward for approval in November of last year. And that density that there is a number of additional buildings that have been built around that 15-story range that were also highlighted on or below the proposed at Metro View Garden. And those buildings are currently.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to put my comment here. Is consider this is really the first time we're receiving this applicants. We spent at least 2 years to discussing the OPA for Highway 7 and the Young. It's been quite a long time. And we made a very hard decision last year. Finally, we got that approved and move forward. This is only 6 months later on, we receive another modification for our OPA and for another change. So I just have some questions and concern regarding to that, right? If it's an earlier stage, we have a lot of buffers to negotiate. We're spending tons of hours and time, and we made the decision last year, and now it's only 6 months. We have to revisiting certain area, which is a little bit challenging for me. I just want to comment that. Thank you so much.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Davidson?
Thank you. Just a quick question through you, Mr. Mayor. With all that development, how does the region make sure that the sewer and everything can accommodate the extra? I feel like it's all going to come online at once and we don't know what's going to happen until it does. But how do we approach that in terms of infrastructure?
For you, Mr. Chair, there's servicing allocation information that's shared between staff at the city level and the region level. And ultimately, allocation is assigned by council. So if there is not sufficient allocation to support a development, allocated at the site plan stage. So when applications for the process, staff evaluate the available servicing capacity in terms of water, sewer, and make recommendations on that. So if there was a concern around service site plan stage, downstream approval process where we are now with their application, then that would be flagged. And ultimately, there has been instances in the region where there's allocation capacity constraint for development not permitted to move forward because not servicing. We don't have that issue in Richmond Hill significantly right now, but there are other parts of use to struggle through that where that is a reality. So it is fairly closely monitored, and region has very vested in ensuring.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other comments, I'll just quickly make a couple. So there's been a lot that was said here. The delegates, I think, did a great job in explaining some of the concerns that they have in the community. I do appreciate the fact that, there is going to be a significant amount of density that's put on those lands, given that it's in the Richmond Hill Center. But I think, the main thing that we always try as best as we possibly can is to, work with the applicant and staff to make sure that we get a development, regardless of the height, the density, and all that kind of stuff, that's compatible as much as possible with the neighborhood. So I see in the staff report, there's a number of issues that have been outlined with compatibility that are it just kind of boils down to that, and I think that really needs to be looked at carefully. I would be interested to know, this applicant has appealed us to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Like, what's the issue that is outlined in that? Do you know? Or does anybody know? Okay, go ahead.
Through Mr. Chair, this applicant has appealed the secondary plan to the OLT, and we're actually in the process now scoping what that appeal ultimately entails. I know that there has been concerns raised around density, height, transportation, and parkland as it relates to the policy secondary plan. However, in terms of what is specifically going to be discussed as part of that hearing, it's still open to discussion and also open quite on some direction.
Right. It's a little awkward having an appeal and an application at the same time. So, okay. Anyway, I would say that that's basically it for me. I mean, the staff report, if the members of the public that are here have not read it, I actually have a copy here I can give to you. But I think it's probably good to read that. And as Councillor Sillivet said, she'd be happy to meet with residents in that area to discuss the concerns. And again, I think it's important to go into that knowing that something's going to be built there, but we need to make sure that what is built there works. And some of the issues that you've described and some of the issues that are outlined in the staff report are addressed. So, at least as much as we possibly can. This tonight is just receiving all the comments. You guys have done that a good job, and council has weighed in as well. So with that, we have a motion to receive all comments and refer them back to staff. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And now is the very exciting part of the meeting where we need a motion to adjourn. Okay, Councillor Tree, Councillor Davidson, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thanks.